Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of This Week in the Bush League, hosted by the Chief and the Champ. I'm the Chief, owner of the Bantam Roosters. I've been in this league for 37 years, and I've won it once. That's right, once.
And I am the champ, Jamie Salindong, owner of the Space Augers. And back in 2009, I had a discussion with Christian Walker, and in my backyard, as we were sitting there talking, he said, I hope I could be drafted by the Bush League one day.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on. Christian Walker. You had a conversation with him.
Yes.
Well,
So, Chris,
yeah.
What's that?
Give us the context of how that happened.
Okay. So he actually grew up in Limerick and played baseball at Kennedy Kendrick in Norristown.
Okay.
And the guy that my daughter was going out with was in high school was a friend of Christian's, and they actually played baseball together. But then, obviously Christian just became really good, and he came over one day, and I had met him just a couple of times. Not that I know him really that well. Leah, my daughter, knows him pretty well and is friends with him on Instagram. But we had this discussion back in 2009 before he went to South Carolina, University of South Carolina. He was drafted out of high school, I want to say, in the 30th round or something like that. So he elected to go to South Carolina, and as you know, as a freshman, or maybe not know, as a freshman and a sophomore, they actually not only won the SEC title, but they won the College World Series 2 years in a row.
Wow. And he was part of that team. Wow.
Yeah, and I want to say his time, I know he played with Jackie Bradley, and I want to say that Whit Merrifield might have been on that team as well. It's really interesting. The SEC is probably the best college baseball league, don't you think?
Yeah, I think the SEC is the best college everything.
Basketball, it might be up for grabs, but you're probably pretty damn close, right?
Yeah. They might not basketball. They might not have the depth, but there's always Kentucky, and
sure,
and Florida was pretty good for about 10 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's kind of cool. So Kennedy Kendrick's in Norristown.
Yeah. Yep.
And he lived in Limerick.
He lives in Limerick, right? And I want to say that so after his junior year, right? Because once you turn down a baseball offer as a high school senior, I think it's 3 years. You can be drafted after your junior year. I don't know. You played baseball. You were on the verge of being drafted. You tell me.
I don't know if I would use the verge, but anyway, I was eligible. Just like every other high school student. Yeah. So
he was actually drafted in after his junior year, fourth round.
Wow.
By the Orioles, and I want to say at that time, oh gosh, when the Orioles drafted him, I don't know if Chris Davis was on their radar, but he had some pretty good years. Moved to, they let him go. Cincinnati picked him up for a hot second, and of course he was a first baseman, so he would have been behind Joey Votto. Moved to Arizona and was behind Paul Goldschmidt. And I didn't think he was even going to get a chance to play until the Goldschmidt trade happened. He actually was Pacific Coast Player MVP in 2017 or 18. So he has a pretty good history.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. So he was waived in 17 by the Orioles, and the Braves pick him up. And then it looks like that was...
so he was behind Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, that was the beginning of spring training. Then in March of that same year, he was waived, and the Reds picked him up. And then March of that same year, he was waived, and the Diamondbacks picked him up. So obviously people knew who he was because he was picked up pretty quickly. And... that's pretty interesting. So, with the rule with baseball is if you sign with a 4-year school, yes, you can't be drafted to your junior year or your third year in school. But if you sign with a junior college, which is pretty big in baseball, junior colleges are big, you could be drafted every year. So a guy technically could be drafted
really? Okay.
after his high school year, freshman in junior college, sophomore in junior college, uh, junior year in a 4-year school, and a senior year in a 4-year school. You technically could be drafted 5 times
Okay.
in the major league draft, and that's why I don't want to say a lot of kids. That's why junior colleges are pretty big options for someone who maybe gets drafted in the 15th round, 20th round, and they might want to say, you know what, I'll go to a JC, see if I can, get bigger, a little stronger, I'm a little older, and they get drafted again a year later. I actually played with a guy when I was in junior college. He was from, it wasn't called Kennedy Kendrick. He went to Archbishop Kendrick. It was just, the schools hadn't merged at that time. And he was drafted by the Indians twice. He was drafted out of high school, came to Monaco, and he was drafted out of Westchester by the Indians. He transferred to Westchester.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a pretty good player. Those kids, I played with a couple kids from Kennedy Kendrick, and yeah, they were all pretty good. So they must have had a pretty decent program at Bishop Kendrick. You know who else is from Bishop Kendrick?
Who's that?
Gino. I can't pronounce his last name. The guy from
Auriemma.
And Martelli is from Kendrick. He coached there. And,
oh, wow.
And the basketball coach, I believe, for the women's Notre Dame team.
Oh, is that Monkey Moffitt or
McGraw? I think her last name is
McGraw.
Yeah. I think they were all there at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
That's a small little school. I mean, Bishop Kendrick was small. I mean, Norristown's not that big, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
who knew?
Yeah, and Archbishop Kennedy were the kids from Roxborough, because I played with the kid from Kennedy too, and yeah, they're pretty good programs. That's interesting. Well, you're almost famous.
Let's put it this way: if I ever went to a Diamondbacks game and I would yell to him and say hi, he would have no idea who I am.
Okay. Do you have to say I'm Leah's dad?
Probably. And then show him a picture so he would oh, okay, so now I'm starting to put the two together, right?
Yeah. And I actually think he was a Bearcat. I think Tom had
Yes.
Yeah.
Tom, you know what? Have you have the stats up there. He had a really good year last year, right? So imagine this: you're the Diamondbacks, right? You just trade one of your franchise player, Paul Goldschmidt. You're like, okay, we're going to do this platoon, and Christian Walker's going to be at the short side of the platoon because the first baseman should be Jake Lamb. Lamb gets hurt, and Christian goes on to play in 152 games and then 603 plate appearances, right?
Yeah.
86 runs,
yeah.
29 homers, 73 RBIs, 8 stolen bases. That's pretty good. And an OPS of 825.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn good.
Yeah, for his first, full season, 155 strikeouts, so he would have to cut down on that. But according to Baseball Reference, they have simulated 2020 stats through each day. Did you know that?
I did.
Yeah.
And
So
what program are they using?
I don't know, but he is simulated hitting 317 right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Not as many homers, only 5 through May 31st. What's that, 2 months? So, yeah, that. So maybe it shows that he's worked on his strikeouts and put the ball in play more. Yeah, we'll see.
Its simulation is powered by Out of the Park Baseball 21.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, that's probably pretty close. Right?
So what you're going to find out is that by me playing this game, I'm actually going to have a leg up on everybody on draft day. You want to talk about draft day?
Well, yeah. Let me give me 1 minute because we announced last week that we were going to have Pete Barth, former owner of the Carpet Kings, on. He forgot about us 2 weeks ago, and then Jamie called him up, went right to voicemail, sent him a text. Jamie called him up, went right to voicemail, and we pressed on. So, so I don't know if Pete is teasing us. Maybe he really doesn't want to be on the show. Maybe he's listened to a couple and thought, you know what, yeah, I'm not really interested at that point. I don't know. So our people will contact his people, and I don't know if we'll try to reschedule them. But
My guess is that after he heard Stan on there, it's hard to believe anybody's going to top Stan. So all of the current owners have an obligation. The past owners have no obligation, and to try and top Stan would be difficult.
Right, so this is where we're at in our station of the show, is that we have 7 listeners, and the people that we scheduled, they actually forget twice.
Yeah, so anybody that was tuning in to listen to Pete can probably stop the podcast now, right? Although we hope you don't.
No, I wouldn't stop because we are going to get into Bill's Arby uniform at some point. Yeah, he talked pretty tough about stealing that banner and all that other stuff, but he kind of glossed over the uniform thing. But we'll bring it back up.
That's what resonated with you, huh?
Yeah, the uniform. So let's talk about the MLB owners' proposal, which has the Players Association has not responded to this. Is that right? I haven't seen a response by them.
I keep looking online, and I can't find anything, but it's really just a big sigh for me. It's like, really? Everything else is going on. Owners are going to try and try and squeeze more money out of the players. It's just hard to believe at this point.
Yeah, I think in their initial reaction is, this probably isn't going to, the Players Association, this probably isn't going to happen. We're too far apart. But I think that is, if you remember the CARES Act, when that started, the stimulus checks that were going to, the Republicans put something out and the Democrats came back saying, yeah, that's not going to work. This is not even close. We're not even close. This won't happen. Within 10 days, they got it squared away. And I think, I think the Players Association would come back. I'm looking at an article from the Washington Post. It says the MLB Players Association officials extremely disappointed. Proposed cuts were massive, meaning salaries. So they're gonna look at it and then come back.
So take me through that. Tell me what you think and what the players' position was and what is the holdup in all of this.
Right. So what I'm reading is that the players were okay with the prorated salary, right? If they started July 4th that week, they're okay with the prorated salary. The problem is that the MLB backed away from its 50-50 revenue sharing, which kind of stinks. I mean, you feel like they should be able to share that. The only reason anybody's watching baseball is not because of an owner, it's because of a player. So that's a little disappointing. And then the owners want to cut salary because they're not going to have fans. So they're going to lose fans, concessions, not memorabilia, clothing, stuff like that they can sell at the stadium. And I think that's what the Players Association is kind of balking at. Although I did see something that the owners might be interested in giving more, expanding the playoffs and giving more playoff revenue to the players. But that only includes teams who make it far. You know what I mean? You're the Kansas City Royals. That means nothing to you. Like, you're not going to make the playoffs.
Right. So where do you fall on this on sides here?
Yeah. So I think where baseball needs to be careful is, like you've mentioned before, 2021 is the last year of the collective bargaining agreement. We're in 2020 right now. If they cancel this season, and if they play next year and then go on strike or a lockout, that's a problem. Like I don't see where that they're gonna retain fans. It's gonna be a big hit. I think you mentioned it. People like you and I and our peers, 50 and over, are still gonna watch baseball because we've watched it for 40 plus years. But kids who are 7, 8, 9 years old, are they gonna keep doing that? Are they even gonna care?
Well, we talked, pre-production on this. There's a possibility, an outside possibility, right, that let's just say that they don't come to an agreement in 2000, this year in 2020. Who's to say that we don't have a COVID-20 and we're back in the same situation next year? And then there's no collective bargaining agreement in place for, after the 21 season. So we could be looking potentially, worst case scenario, 2 to 3 years without baseball. Now, I think there's too much money in the game to be lost on both sides. And, if you're a player, what's the average career? What's your average life? A couple of years, 3 or 4 years. If you're an owner, there's lots of money still to be made, and it's going to hurt a lot of the people that were just on the precipice of becoming a Major League Baseball player, players that were in the minors, and now they're going to be lost there, and it's going to be tough for all sports. I don't know what baseball does, but it certainly it's going to be a black eye if all these other leagues like the NBA and the NHL come back, play in front of no fans and come to an agreement, and baseball can't do that.
Yeah, so further down in the article, to give you some context, ESPN reported, for an example, a player who had a contract of $35 million a year. I don't know who the hell that is.
Mike Trout.
Trout, and yeah, I guess Trout only. That player would, under the owner's proposal, would make $7.8 million, but they would have a floor, like how far a player could go down in salary. A player making $1 million would get $434,000. So the reduction isn't as much. You know what I mean? And it's still, they would differentiate between players who make boatloads of money and players who, by league standards, are just getting by. I don't mean that from an economic standard, but you know what I mean, like making a minimum. Yeah. So they would have a kind of a pay scale thing. But the problem is that the union leadership is made up of veterans who are on the higher end of that pay scale. So, you know what I mean? I don't think they're that's kind of a tough hit. You're making $30 million and you're going to pay half the year, and you're only going to make 7.8. That's a big difference,
See, but isn't that the owners got their proposal out there first, and unfortunately the players are always trying to play response to this, and maybe what should have happened is that the players, if they could have collectively have done this, come out with their response first. But it's hard when you only have 30 owners and you have 600, 700 players to agree on something.
Yeah,
and it's just it just sets a bad precedence here. They're trying to divide the players. It's just a cheap attempt to divide the players, and trying to look in front of normal workers, you, me, that type of thing, and saying, "Oh, look, this person doesn't want to have a $7 million salary." Well, you know what? If we had skills like that, and we were one of 700 people in the world, let's look at it from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
If you and I were one of 700 people to have a podcast, we would be making this kind of money in the world, right?
Yeah.
Instead, we're one of a couple $100 million or something like that. So, from an economic standpoint, they do something that nobody else can do. And the owners have really, they pay for 3 years. They can pay rookies and into their second and third year, the minor league or the major league minimum, which is still a nice salary of $560,000 or something like that. Right. It's not until year 4 that players can actually start to go to arbitration, and it's not until year 7 where they go to free agency. Well, as you know, most players' careers are less than 6 years, so it's built in that most players will never get to free agency.
Yeah, no, most players don't. They get waived, and then they're just negotiating minor league deals to see if they can land on a team. And what I'm looking at when you're looking at canceling the season, like if that happens, how do you feel like the Dodgers feel? Like they just traded one of their best players, Verdugo, to get Betts, but they had to take on David Price's salary, which they got 3 years after this, and not knowing if Betts would even re-sign with them. Yeah, that's kind of a weird spot they're in too. Because if I was the Dodger guy, I'd be like, "Hey, man, we're playing the season because I got 1 year with Betts that I know will be on my baseball team and trying to win a World Series. They've been searching for almost 10 years."
And a couple things to that, right? For the Dodgers, number one, you're right. Mookie Betts only has this particular year, and then he can become a free agent. And most places, if you look at their team, man, they just look so good, right? And this is coming off of years. Back-to-back World Series appearances in 18 and 19, which some people could say is that both of those, back-to-back years in 18 and 19. No, 17, 18, sorry. And 19 was the Nationals. But some people could say that was possibly stolen from them, right? From teams that had cheated. So if you're a Dodgers fan, it's got to be really tough. Now, the good thing and the contra to all the stuff that we're talking about is somebody like David Price. Did you see what he did? Yeah. Where he basically out of his own pocket is going to pay each player in the Dodgers organization, was it $1,000?
Yeah, in the minor leagues. Yep. Yeah. Which is nice. I mean, because he makes a lot of money, and that's a big deal that he did that. And it's
it is a big deal.
Yeah, and especially you're talking about 19-year-olds, that are playing minor league baseball. I mean, and a lot of them aren't even from the United States. So $1,000 to a guy who's from the Dominican is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess in the next couple of weeks, we might have to start thinking about a draft day, right?
I would think so. So I guess I would throw this out to you and to the owners. Let's assume that baseball starts that first weekend in July, which just so happens to be that Saturday is July 4th. Would we talk about a draft on that previous Saturday, which would be, June 27th?
Yeah, and that's normally what we do, 1 week ahead. So I think probably everyone in the group needs to kind of pencil that in, right?
Yeah, I don't really have too much to do other than scrubbing dishes and making meals and doing laundry. I'm open.
Yeah, well, I think it's something we need to talk about it, and we'll get a feel because in that Washington Post article I was referring to, they had talked about starting spring training mid-June. Well, they referred to it as spring training 2.0. But, what we talked about earlier, that pitchers need to get cranked back up again. So mid-June, if teams start to organize and start organized practice and working out, then, we need to pin down a date.
So let me bring this back all around to Bush League, right? Since the draft was canceled back in early March, have you even looked at any stats? Have you done any draft prep at this point since then?
No,
me neither.
No. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean you have? You're playing that out-of-park baseball. You're getting a feel of who's supposed to be pretty good and who's supposed to have bad years, aren't you?
Yeah, you're right. That's probably more of a side effect from something like that, right? But, I'm too dumb to even know that.
Well, maybe it just through osmosis, it got into your brain.
When we draft players, I'll say he's not going to be good until 2023. So.
Yeah, I'll look at players. When a player comes up, I'll say, "Hey, did you try to trade him?" And that's who I'll go after.
There you go.
So, on another baseball note, you sent me that Roy Halladay article. That was really interesting. Did you know anything that was going on with him when he was playing?
No, you know what? I guess what struck me is the fact that I didn't know and how closely held the personal issues and the demons that the poor guy had, and I guess it was kept secret for the longest of time. And I guess his his wife was, is speaking about it pretty frankly now, and I guess just wants people to learn from this. But quite honestly, it was a shock to me.
Yeah, so there's an E60, ESPN, an E60, which is their news, news journalism type show on Roy Halladay and his addiction. I did hear on SportsCenter that his wife wanted this to go on, or kind of blessed it, because she wanted everyone to know that he wasn't just like an addict. He was, but it wasn't, because he was careless, or, he lived a crazy lifestyle. It's just that he had those injuries and he ended up getting addicted to those painkillers, which can happen to anyone. I didn't realize he had an alcohol issue in throughout his career. It didn't seem to be with Philly. It was more the painkillers. But if you look at his stats, you can see it took him a while to get going. His first couple years was not they weren't solid as they were once he won that Cy Young Award.
Didn't the article that I had sent you, didn't it say that he actually came up, I'm trying to call up the information now, he came up in 1998, I guess, for a cup of coffee.
Yep.
to the Blue Jays, and then he had such a bad performance. I guess his first full year would have been 1999. Is that he was actually sent all the way back down to Single A to adjust. That's after having some appearances in the major leagues.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it now. He came out of the bullpen a lot in '99. He started 18 games, 8-7, 3.92 ERA. But he wasn't lights out. The next year he was 4-7. The following year he's 5-3. So he was up and down. He was pitching out of the bullpen. It wasn't until 2002 where he became a full-time starter and he won 19 games. So that's what I'm talking. He must have had some issues prior to that, or he just couldn't figure out his pitches. And then he had one bad year in 2004 where he was 8-8 after he won the Cy Young. So that, seeing this up and down career a little bit might have been accounted for of the alcohol and the drugs. Well, drugs, I mean painkillers. So. That's another discussion for another day, right? We have all of these legalized opioids and painkillers, that type of thing, but yet states are reluctant to legalize marijuana use. It's just kind of just a little bit of hypocrisy, but such is life. Yeah. So and I didn't realize he won a Cy Youngs. There was a few years in between of those. There was 7 years in between the two Cy Youngs he won, which is pretty good. I mean, you talk about someone who's lasted that long. Normally, Cy Youngs are won in groups and then they stop. But yeah, he went 7 years in between his first and his second one.
But look at that. In 2006, he was third in the Cy Young voting.
Yep.
2007 was fifth. 2008 was second, and 2009 he was fifth again. So, he had 4 other years he placed top 10 in between the two Cy Young awards.
Yeah, and he finished first and second his first 2 years in Philly, which his first year in Philly was pretty solid. That was pretty solid first year in the National League, and we've talked about it before. You mentioned about the Chris Carpenter, Roy Halladay Game 5 as the best pitch game that you maybe saw. So he had a pretty solid career. So I haven't seen the E60 yet. I've read reports on it that it's well done and eye-opening. That's what I think most of the responses I see is that not a lot of people realize that he was struggling with any of these issues.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out and see if I can find that. And just kind of a backstory to that 2011 game that he pitched against Chris Carpenter, Friends of the Space Auditors, is that they both came up in the Blue Jays organization. They were good friends, right?
Yeah. I think he spoke at his funeral.
Yeah. I mean, they remained friends till the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess Carpenter got let go because he had some injuries, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the problem, right? Just pitching is such an unnatural motion that you're almost bound to have an injury at some point. And I think you've touched upon this in past podcasts, and just how amazing it was that a lot of these other pitchers back in the '60s and '70s, even in the '80s, how many innings that they would pitch, and you wonder with pitch counts that you've talked about, and today's medical treatments, would they have lasted longer but just pitched less innings? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I just think their mindset was to go out and throw as many innings as you possibly could. I was watching something today on ESPN. They talked to the 13 living people that threw perfect games.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I actually was on CBS Sports on the CBS Sports.com TV or whatever that thing is. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And all the guys that did it were workhorses, guys that could pitch seven innings pretty regularly. And not all of them were Hall of Famers, obviously. Like David Wells, Len Barker, Mike Witt. Yeah, but the guys who pitched seven innings pretty regularly throughout their career. Yeah, it was a good little. Yeah, if you're looking for something to watch, go look for it. It was pretty cool. I think the only one they didn't speak with was Sandy Koufax. Is he still alive?
Okay. Yes, he is.
Is he? All right.
Yeah.
And they did talk to Nolan Ryan because he threw 7 no-hitters, but he did not throw a perfect game. And he kind of giggled. He said, "Yeah, I just didn't have the control to pitch a perfect game." And it's funny how he just said it. He just said, like, "I just never had the control to do it, with his pitches." But yeah, 7 no-hitters. I think I would trade one perfect game for 7 no-hitters. Jeez.
I think so. What is the second most no-hitters? Is it even more than 2?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know. Second most no-hitters. I think Nolan Ryan might have the most one-hitters too. Yeah,
we'll have to check that out.
We definitely have to check it out. Yeah, I don't know. Well, here I got it right here. All right, Sandy Koufax is second.
With how many?
With 4.
4. Wow. Okay.
Bob Feller had 3. Mark Burley had 2.
Mark Burley, nice.
Yeah, and he threw a perfect game as well. Jim Bunning, he threw a perfect game on Father's Day. He did it in 2 leagues. And Johnny Vandermeer has 2. Didn't he throw 2 consecutive no-hitters?
I believe he did.
Yeah. Jake Arrieta has 2. That's surprising?
It is to me.
Yeah, because I watched him last year, and he can't get out of an inning without giving up a hit. Let alone 9.
Yeah, well, I think his best days are behind him. I see Tiny Tim Lincecum is on here.
He is, yes. He is on there.
And Hideo Nomo.
And the guy that broke the scandal, Mike Fiers, threw 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? So anyway, yeah. So if you're looking for something to watch, that's a pretty good. It was on CBSSports.com on the cable, so I found it. And it was pretty interesting with the interviews of the players who did that, and they talked about the Detroit pitcher who the umpire called the last batter safe. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. That was that.
Yeah.
You know what? I felt so bad for the umpire because he knew that he had blew the call.
Yeah.
And actually, he wrote a book about not just about that, but I think he mentioned it in his book. I think he actually went on television the next day with actually in tears.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who was the Detroit pitcher. Do you remember?
Yeah, I just watched. It's a Spanish guy, and I can't remember. It was a young kid.
All right.
Though.
Well.
Yeah.
We'll find out. We'll find out the next time.
Yeah.
Hey, what's going on today in baseball history?
Yeah, so I got two notes here. 1964, the Giants beat the Mets 8-6. The game was 7 hours and 23 minutes long. It was the longest game by time at that time. It's 23 innings, and this is what I took note of. Gaylord Perry came out of the bullpen in the 13th and pitched 10 scoreless extra inning frames. So in the little story, he's quoted as saying it was just me and the spitter for 10 innings.
Yeah, he never tried to hide that, did he?
No, I used to love that. You know, when he'd wipe his thumb behind his ear, behind his cap. You know, oh my gosh. I thought the guy
The whole routine he went through.
Yeah, it was a whole routine, yeah. And you never knew, like, yeah, you just never knew. You know, I guess he did it, but yeah, you just never knew. The second one I got is 1976. The Padres beat the Braves. I don't know if did you watch that game? 1976, May?
I did not.
You
We
did
did not
not.
have cable back then, so
Okay.
we weren't getting
Yeah.
Cable did not come to South Coventry until I think 2008.
Well, there wasn't many people in Atlanta watching that game. The announced attendance was 2,994 people. Ted Turner invited all in attendance back to the next night's game as his guest, essentially giving them free tickets.
Okay.
So next game was June 1st. Again, the Padres and the Braves, and 2,100 people showed up. So
wait, that's less, isn't it?
it's 885 less fans showed up. Yeah. And 76 was bad. I looked at they both lost. The Braves lost 90 games. The Padres lost 89. But I think Ted Turner actually managed that team at one point. Like, he came down in the dugout.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And when I was talking to a former Bush Leaguer, Greg Souders, he sent me a couple pictures of players who didn't have their real last name on their uniform, and Ted Turner actually had a number 17, and it was in the 70s, 76 or 77, a Braves player, number 17, and he told him to wear the word channel. Because TBS was on channel 17. Of course, baseball nixed that the next day when they picked up on it. So, yeah, he was kind of a weird dude, but he kind of lucked into which we'll talk about later into the 90s, where he had really good baseball teams.
Well, just to hang on for a second here. You talk about baseball nixing, the fact that you couldn't put channel on the back of the uniform. Let's fast forward now, 45 years, and now they have Players Weekend, and you can put different names on the back of your uniform, right? Now, the league has to approve it, but have you seen that on Players Weekend?
I have, yeah. And they have their own cleats, and they can do whatever they want, right? With their spikes as well?
That sounds like a question for the Bush League, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if I would. Did you ever wear a uniform with your name on the back?
No, I don't believe I did.
Yeah, I didn't either. Yeah, I've never worn a uniform with my name on the back.
I was never good enough to. My daughters did, but I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think that was a thing back then. Like, a lot of major league teams didn't even have names on their back. I think that was a 70s thing. So
yeah, you couldn't afford the iron-on stick-ons that you got out of your Fruit Loops cereal or something like that. You had to collect all, however many boxes. For me, it would have been 9 additional boxes to buy. You would have been a lot easier. So
yeah, and then the other thing you mentioned, have you had the new beer coming out of Jersey City?
I haven't, and that's what got missed in all this. Why don't you tell everybody about this?
Yeah, so Departed Souls Brewery out of Jersey City, New Jersey, came out with a beer. It's called Trash Can Banger Beer, and it's got the Astros colors on it, and it sells.
It's sweet looking.
It is sweet looking. It sells $17 for a 4-pack. It's an IPA. I've actually looked to see if I can buy it.
Well, you would just buy it, right? You wouldn't drink it because it's purported it might have saffron in it, And I know you don't like beer with any kind of taste, right? It has to be plain. Sorry, I just got to pick on you about that.
No, I think I might. Yeah, actually, not yesterday. I don't even know what day it is anymore. It's Sunday, right? So it was sometime this week. Sometime this week, I had a Fat Tire. You like Fat Tire?
Yeah, I do. It's a good beer. I don't see you moving into the IPA realm. I find you more of a pale ale type of individual. You know, I don't see you in the double IPAs or something like that. But we're going to work on that over the next couple of years.
Well, wait. I love Dogfish Head. Is that an IPA?
Well, it depends. They have lots of IPAs, and they have lots of different types of beers, which they use. I would consider a lot of exotic ingredients in their beers. They have some of the best, but yeah. So all right. Well, I could give you credit for that.
So maybe we should do that. If we end up having a draft in June, we should get like the 90. The Dogfish 90 and pass that out.
90-minute IPA. That is an IPA. Okay.
Yeah.
We definitely won't do the 120-minute IPA. That's at 18% ABV, and after two, everybody's gonna be underneath the table. Everybody will be like Stan Barry Bonds.
So yeah, that's one of the funniest stories. If I had a list of funny stories, it would be when you told me that about when you were down at the beach and somebody woke up at 8 and thought it was 8 in the morning, and it was at 8 at night. Yeah.
We just talked about that. Yeah, my brother-in-law. We'll tell that story sometime. I don't know if he's listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
So I won't repeat it here. Hey, go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll try to get some trash can banger beer for the draft.
Yes, and I just took a look. It was Armando Galarraga that had the near perfect game that got blown on a call by the umpire, and his name was Jim Joyce. Jim Joyce.
Yeah, he had like a Fu Manchu type. Yeah, I can picture the umpire. Yeah, he had like a big bushy. Yeah, that play almost looked like the George Orta play.
Well, I was going to say, that's the second worst call. The first worst umpire call, and it was Don Beckinger in the 1985 World Series. Cardinals were about to win the World Series. Not that I still hold a grudge to this day, but
yeah, that was a bad call. Actually, the Tigers one was clearly that. Well, I guess they were both bad. Never mind. Yeah, they were bad. All right, so I mentioned about another article, Greg Maddux. So Bill sent me this article from the Washington Post about Maddox's approach to his delivery, about his approach to pitching, right? It was really interesting. It was written in 2014. So Maddux had a conversation with the writer, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, no hitter can tell the difference in speeds. They can't do it in time. So he pointed down a road, and he said, look at that car. You can't tell if that car is going 55, 65, or 75 miles an hour unless you have some context, which is, another car next to it.
Right.
Of course, he said that, and he said the only one that could do it was Tony Gwynn. And he
really?
said, yeah, and he used an expletive before Tony Gwynn. So, so his whole thing was to make every pitch look the same. He referred to it as a column of milk. So he honed his release point, and where he let that ball go out of his hand, no matter if he's throwing a fastball, curveball, slider, or changeup, to make it look the same. So essentially, he just lulled them into thinking that he could be hit, and his and it's funny how he, I guess when you win 355 games, you take your job seriously and you focus on the details, right? His detail was he didn't want a huge curveball because you could see that earlier. He wanted a slight curveball so you couldn't see it to the very end. So you've already committed. Your hands are coming through. Your bat head's going through. The ball breaks, and then you hit the top of the ball or the bottom of the ball. That was his whole thing. So when I read the article, and thinking back last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about the best pitching performance, where I said Maddux pitched a complete game with 6 hits, and he only threw 77 pitches. Right? That's what his thing was, and he goes on, and this was interesting. He went on the article and he talked about that when he practiced, he always practiced from the windup. And I've heard other pitchers say that. I've heard Jamie Moyer say that, and he said that Moyer's idea was you practice from the windup because the most important pitches you make are from the stretch, right? You practice from the stretch because the most important pitch you're going to make at any point in the game is from a stretch because runners are on base. But Maddox had a different approach to it. He said, when I'm in the windup, I'm just trying to keep the ball in the park. And he said, I can figure that out, how to keep the guy from hitting a home run. But when I'm in the stretch, I want him to put the ball in play, to roll over, double play, get out of the inning, right? So it was a really interesting article about how detailed he was with where he wanted to let the ball go out of his hand, just so that players couldn't tell what speed it was coming at. And he makes a good point. You probably can't tell until the very end, and then it's too late.
Do you think that he would have made a good pitching coach, or do you think he's just such these one-in-a-lifetime talents that it would be hard to translate what he's talking about into actual pitching skills for others?
Right. So I think what makes a good coach is not so much. Well, there is part of it that you have to know what you're talking about. I mean, that's a big part of it, but I think you'd have to care about other people. And I'm not saying Greg Maddux doesn't care about other people. I'm just saying that a coach who teaches anything has to care about the person that he's teaching it to. And maybe he's just not built like that. You know what I mean? Maybe he's just not built like, I don't care enough to teach this to other people. I don't know. You look at a lot of great players, they don't necessarily make good teachers.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I mean, Ted Williams was horrible.
So I do have a question for you. You had talked about Greg Maddux, and he said the only person that could tell the difference in speed was Tony Gwynn. How did do you have any information there on how Tony Gwynn did against Greg Maddux?
Right. So here you go. Tony Gwynn had 103 plate appearances against Greg Maddux. He had 91 at bats, and he hit 429 and never struck out. He never struck out. No.
Wait, you're talking about Greg Maddux, who had over 3,000 strikeouts. He never struck out Tony Gwynn once?
No. He did get Gwynn to roll over on it because he got him to hit into a double play once. But he actually walked him intentionally 6 times.
I think that's the most that I think I saw an article somewhere where that's the most Greg Maddux intentionally walked anybody.
Yeah. So there must have been someone on second and third, and he's like, you know what? I'm just putting him on. I'm not dealing with this guy. I'll deal with someone else. And he had over a 1 OPS. Gwynn had over a 1. And then John Smoltz, we'll talk about those other guys. Gwynn, 68 plate appearances, 65 at bats against Smoltz. He hit 462. He was 30 for 65.
What was his OPS? What was his 30 for 65?
Yeah.
Were these just all singles?
No, he hit a couple homers. He had 12 extra base hits. So.
Okay, wow.
And his OPS was 1.224. But
that's ridiculous.
Smoltz got him to roll over on 3, and he grounded into 3 double plays against Smoltz. The one of the Braves pitchers that Gwynn struggled with, and I'm going to use the word struggled loosely, was Glavine. He had 99 plate appearances. He only hit 312 off of Glavine. Yeah, which is quite. That's below his career average. So
let me ask you, against Smoltz and Glavine, you said 68 plate appearances against Smoltz. He's 99 against Glavine. How many times did he strike out against them? Because we know he didn't strike out against Maddux.
3. He struck out combined 3 times against Glavine and Smoltz. Yeah.
In 270 plate appearances against the 3 of them, 3 Hall of Famers.
Yeah, he struck out 3 times.
3 strikeouts.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that was pretty interesting against those guys. Maybe Gwynn struggled against lefties right? Maybe that's why he only hit 312 against those guys.
All right, next week's homework assignment is see, with maybe 30 or 40 plate appearances, who did Tony Gwynn struggle against? That's next week's assignment.
Okay, yeah, we'll go figure out somebody that he struggled against. And when it struggled, he probably hit 280 against someone he struggled against. Oh my gosh! All right, so this week we are going to have possibly a Friday edition, right?
Yeah, we're going to see if we can get Schmitty, Mike Alexander on a call. Let's see if he can be a little bit better than Pete. I know anybody coming after Stan is going to be a tough road to hoe, but we are going to find out because inquiring minds want to know who is the best stooge of the three stooges. So
Yeah.
Schmitty will be able to help us with that.
Yeah, Mike's going to be a good interview, and I'm looking
He
forward to
should
it.
be really good.
Yeah. All right, and then we'll keep an eye on baseball to see what's going on the next 7 to 14 days, and I don't know. We'll keep our fingers crossed that we have a draft and we have a baseball season. All right.
That's all we can do. All right. Stay safe, my friend.
All right, buddy. I'll see you next week.
Have a good week.
Bye.